Welcome to Iberia, I am Wolf, and today we will explore the famous slave rebellion led by a former gladiator who escaped from a training school in Capua, the legendary Spartacus. It was one of the most significant slave uprisings in ancient Rome, exploding in 73 BC and ravaging the countryside for 2 full years. The rebellion showed us what can happen when the oppressed rise against the oppressors, and how even the mightiest of empires can be challenged by those who seek freedom and justice. But what led to the rebellion, and how did it affect Rome? Let's find out! Rome's expansion and conquest of new territories resulted in an influx of slaves as a result of the spoils of war. Slaves were considered valuable property and were used for labor in mines, agriculture, construction, and other industries. In addition, the expansion of the Roman Empire also led to social and economic conditions that contributed to tensions between slaves and their owners. The growing wealth gap between the elite and the working class meant that many small-scale farmers were struggling to make ends meet. This led to the decline of small-scale agriculture and the rise of large plantations and estates that relied on slave labor. As these large plantations and estates grew in size and number, the number of slaves needed to work them also increased. This created a situation where the slave population was larger and more visible than ever before, and the conditions they faced were often deplorable. The slaves were considered property and had no legal rights or protections. They were often treated cruelly and subjected to harsh punishments. This led to tensions between slaves and their owners, as well as a growing sense of resentment among the slave population. The natural-born leaders Spartacus witnessed and lived through the harsh conditions and mistreatment of slaves in ancient Rome. Spartacus, a gladiator and possibly a former Thracian warrior, was among the slaves who had been captured and forced to fight for the entertainment of the Romans. In 73 BC, he had enough, and together with his fellow gladiators, they led a rebellion to free themselves and their fellow slaves from this oppression. Spartacus and his followers started by attacking their oppressors and freeing other slaves. They eventually grew into a large army, numbering up to 70,000 men, women, and children. The rebellion quickly spread across Italy, and Spartacus became a formidable leader, was able to outmaneuver and defeat the Roman army sent to stop him. The rebellion was marked by several battles, including the Battle of Mount Vesuvius, where Spartacus and his followers defeated the Roman army led by Gaius Claudius Glaber. This victory allowed the rebels to gain more weapons, soldiers, and continue their march towards Rome. Despite their early victories, the rebels were ultimately defeated by the Roman army led by Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus was a wealthy Roman general who had been given the task of putting an end to the rebellion. He managed to outmaneuver Spartacus and his army, pushing them south and defeating them in several battles. Despite the Roman victory, the rebellion had significant consequences for ancient Rome. It showed the slaves that they could resist their oppressors and inspired other slave uprisings in the future. The rebellion also highlighted the need for more humane treatment of slaves in Rome. So, what really changed for the slaves? Well, first and foremost, Rome wanted to make sure no slave would ever rise up again by increasing the punishment for slave rebellions and tightening the rules for slave ownership. But the conditions for slaves did improve. The Senate passed new laws that made it illegal to mistreat or abuse slaves, and there were new regulations introduced that aimed to improve the living and working conditions of slaves. One of the most significant changes was the gradual shift towards a system of waged labor. Prior to the rebellion, most slaves were treated as property and had no rights. After the rebellion, some slaves were given the opportunity to earn a wage and could work towards gaining their freedom. While this was not the case for all slaves, it represented a significant step towards the eventual abolition of slavery. The rebellion also had an impact on the attitudes of the Roman peoples towards slavery. It demonstrated that slaves could be a threat to the stability of the empire, and this led some people to question the morality of owning slaves. While slavery continued in Rome for several more centuries, this was a pivotal moment in the history of slavery in Rome. It did lead to increased punishments for slave rebellions, but it also prompted changes in the laws and regulations surrounding slavery that aimed to improve the living and working conditions of slaves, as well as starting the transition towards a system of wage labor and raising questions about the morality of owning slaves. Unfortunately, the rebellion didn't outright end slavery, but at the end of the day, if we contextualize the time period, this marked a huge victory for slaves throughout the Roman Republic. So, what is your opinion on this matter? What would you like to talk about next? Well, let me know in the comments below. I have been Wolf, stay wonderful, and I'll see you next time. Peace.